Cuppa Tea in hand and RTX 5090. It's here. I'm going to try and build the smallest, fastest gaming PC ever. Well, you might say this Cooler Master Core 100 isn't the smallest SFF, small form factor PC out there, but I would argue in terms of footprint, it's absolutely tiny on my desk here. So what I'm going to do, pop in this Founders Edition RTX 5090, because the first time I got this out of the box, as you'll probably see, it's a lot smaller than we expected. It's a dual slot card, so this should fit in here no problem. And while a lot of you guys will maybe be buying a new 50 series card to put in your proper big tower over here, and actually I've got an ROG 4090 in here right now, I'm just curious if we can make the fastest, smallest PC ever. This is not just smaller, but it's also obviously a whole lot more powerful. NVIDIA say we might see up to double the performance, 4090 to 5090, but big asterisks at the end of that because a lot of the heavy lifting is down to DLSS 4 with its expanded multi-frame generation. Anyway, we'll have a look at that later on. But there's other things that are worth noting. We've got DisplayPort 2.1 now as well, 3 of those, and they've actually flipped them so it's the right way up with the release catch at the top now, along with an HDMI 2.1. This, of course, is on their Blackwell architecture. We have PCI Gen 5, and we also get 32 gigabytes of VRAM, new G7 memory. They've also rejigged the cooling, still 2 fans, but the air comes in the top and then exhausts out the bottom with a little bit of an inlet on the sides here to help direct that air out of the bottom. So hopefully it doesn't run too hot. The problem, though, is that NVIDIA say you need a 1000 watt PSU for this 5090, and in here, as standard, you get an 850 watt PSU. I'm going to try it, we'll see if it works, we'll see if you can run a 5090 on an 850 watt PSU, but I think I found a fix courtesy of the Corsair SF1000. It's a smaller form factor PSU which should fit in here no problem. I think we should cut to a montage. You can actually fit a 3-slot card in here, but obviously we're going with the 5090. The whole thing is 15.7 liters, so nice little click. It's so much more satisfying building a small PC, not just for the aesthetics, but also because Mrs. Tech Chap won't mind it being in the living room. Very nice. So we've got the AIO, again, came with the case, on top of my Ryzen 7 9800X3D. That's probably the best gaming CPU you can get right now. We've actually got 2 M2 SSDs, totaling 6 terabytes of storage, which I think will be more than enough. And then while you can't really see much of it, for the motherboard, we've gone with the ROG Strix X870i. We'll see if it works. Also, no judgment on my cable management just yet. We're not finished. I'm still probably going to switch out the PSU tomorrow. The display port, power in the back. There's the on button, there's the on button. Now, what that could be, we're here, but success. You can tell it was a serious problem because I put my glasses on. Essentially, there weren't enough power connectors going from the default 850 PSU for a 5090. There were only 3, we needed 4, and even then, the 12-pin connector was up to a 450 watt limit. We actually needed 600 watts for this new GPU. So this bad boy, as I expected, saved the day, the Corsair SF1000. So if you're gonna get yourself a Cooler Master Core 100 Max build like this, then definitely get yourself one of these. And of course, I'll leave links to all the components and this entire setup basically in the description below if you want to check it out. But we have success, it works, and Cyberpunk is running here currently maxed out with path tracing, 4x multi-frame generation, 250 frames per second at 4K. But even though it's running Cyberpunk, I'm actually amazed how quiet it is. Let me just get right up to it with my little microphone, which is in my lapel here. I can tell you I had the 7900 XTX in here before, also with the lower PSU, and it was so loud. I'm amazed how quiet this is. I plugged a thermal camera into my iPhone, and we were looking at sort of a peak of 60 degrees Celsius coming out of the card. Now, one thing to note is that unfortunately, because the card intakes at the top here and exhausts at the back, it's basically pushing all that hot air into the motherboard and therefore onto the CPU, which isn't ideal. With the shroud on, it will be able to pull air in, so importantly, we are cooling the card, but then it itself is heating everything else. So far, I'm actually really happy with this. Mostly just how quiet it is. I think we can get away with it being a living room PC. And we are good to go. We've got the NVIDIA wrap up here, 9800X3D, 64 gigs of RAM, the RTX 5090, and of course this bad boy, the ROG PG32UCDM. All right, so we're up and running, playing Cyberpunk, maxed out settings, 4K with path tracing, ray tracing, so you can't get higher quality graphic settings, image quality settings, but no DLSS, no multi-frame generation, anything like that, all that magic on top, which is, supposed to boost our frame rate. So natively, you could say, we're getting low 30s frame rate. So DLSS turned on, let's put it in balanced mode and apply that. Still no frame generation, but just DLSS. And we've gone from 30-ish, 33 FPS to sort of low 70s. It's around double the frame rate turning on DLSS super resolution. Right, so DLSS frame generation is now enabled. I'm going to keep it at the lowest setting, the 2x, and this is basically how we had it with frame generation, which was introduced with DLSS 3 and carried on with 3.5, where for every rendered frame, they would then create this one extra frame to go in, effectively doubling your frame rate. And yeah, actually that has basically doubled the frame rate. We're in the low 70s just with DLSS. Now we're looking at 142, 141, but we're just getting started because now with DLSS 4 and the enhanced multi-frame generation, we can actually put that up to 3x or even 4x. Let's start with 3, going from the sort of low 120s. Now we're at just under 200, around 200 frames per second. Finally, let's whack it up to 4x. So this will be where for every one real rendered frame, that's a bit of a tongue twister, there will be 3 AI frames added as well, pushing us into low 260s, sort of high 250s. This card is made for these kind of monitors. But just how fast is this versus last generation's 4090? And maybe more importantly, how much extra performance does this new multi-frame generation get you? Well, in Cyberpunk at 4K with maxed out settings, with path tracing and DLSS balanced, but without multi-frame generation, the 5090 was actually a decent 53% faster. But then with frame generation set to 2x, which is the same as the 4090 can do, the 5090 was 25% faster. But with the 5090's new multi-frame gen at its highest 4 times option, I managed to hit over 230 frames per second, over double what the 4090 was capable of. And then switching gears to Alan Wake 2, again at 4K, maxed out settings, path tracing and DLSS balanced, the 5090 was slightly disappointingly only 16% faster with multi-frame gen off, and about 21% faster with multi-frame set to 2x. Once again though, it's that multi-frame 4 times option that lets the 5090 absolutely run away with it, with a 79% higher frame rate versus when it was set to 2x. And impressively, the latency appeared to stay about the same, and to my eye there wasn't any stuttering or weird artifacting. Assuming the game you're playing supports DLSS 4, it's very impressive stuff. And then in a couple of synthetic benchmarks, the 5090 was just 14% faster in Geekbench 6's OpenCL test, a decent 33% faster in the ray tracing heavy 3D Mark Port Royal test, and a solid 50% faster in 3D Mark Steel Nomad. Interestingly though, the latency hasn't changed significantly, and I would say anything under 50 milliseconds in a game like this is absolutely fine. No frame generation, around 30 milliseconds in this setup, with frame generation at 2x, about 40, 39, with the maxed out 4x of frame generation, sort of 43, 44. So it does increase the latency, but we're also quadrupling the frame rate in the best case scenarios. And I would take that over 12 millisecond high latency. But that's pretty crazy. This little PC here, which is the size of about half of my mouse mat rolled up, can get me 4K 250 FPS maxed out path tracing in Cyberpunk. Not too shabby. Oh, and if you're wondering about Warzone, well, this is maxed out 4K with multi-frame generation because it does support it in DLSS, and we're getting 250 frames per second. So in Call of Duty, I am maxing out this monitor. 250 pretty consistently as well, actually, and only 18 to 20 milliseconds of latency despite having frame generation on. But of course we also had this frame gen on the 40 series. It's not multi-frame gen, it's not DLSS 4. Still, even with 2x frame gen, effectively, 250 FPS. That'll do.
Enemies are dropping into the area.
I know there's a lot of me waffling in this video, but there's also a lot to get your head around. And actually, this is a really useful little chart from NVIDIA. It shows what's new in terms of the DLSS 4 features for each generation of card. The only thing that's new with the 50 series is this multi-frame generation. The 40 series still gets frame generation, but now we have multi-frame generation. More than one frame, essentially. I do have a slight confession. I may have just downloaded the save game, which is the completed version of Hogwarts Legacy, because I didn't want to start from the beginning. I have played a few hours. Mrs. Tech Chap actually really enjoys this. This is the Hogwarts Legacy graphics menu. This is actually really interesting. You've got the DLSS here, and if I change the upscale mode, let's go from quality, you can see what the rendering resolution of the game is. So if we turn it off completely, that should go back up to 4K. Yep, 3840 by 2160. So the higher the level of DLSS, the lower the rendering resolution of the game, which is why if you're playing, say, on an 8K display, generally it recommends the ultra performance mode, 4K performance, and then Quad HD maybe balanced. But because of this new transformer model powering the DLSS, essentially what we're getting is balanced level of image quality at performance DLSS. Previously, where you might see some shimmering or some artifacting, especially with sort of fine detailed text or like, I don't know, chain link fences in games. Now you're getting better image quality. Still following me? So maxed out, let's leave DLSS in auto mode with frame generation, because Hogwarts is one of the around 75 games that supports frame gen at launch. With ray reconstruction turned on, reflex low latency, yes, of course we want to reduce the latency as much as possible. And latency, fairly high actually, around 70 milliseconds. Although, again, for this kind of game, not the end of the world. But I think that's why you're not really going to see multi-frame gen in, Valorant or CSGO or those twitchy shooters. Although DLSS, super resolution, the upscaling is still worth having. Alan Wake 2, also one of my favorite games of all time, possibly, and actually this has been fully optimized for the new graphics cards, 4x DLSS frame generation. So if you have a current RTX 40 series card, then you can have regular frame gen, I think at essentially 2x, but with a 50 series GPU, you can either have it now at 3 or 4x, which is primarily what that main bump in performance is that we're getting from these new cards. And we're getting a pretty consistent sort of high 140s, around 150 FPS, thereabouts. If you've got a 144 Hz 4K monitor, then you're in business, not quite maxing out this 240 though. Fully utilizing the GPU, this CPU is not a bottleneck whatsoever. And of course, turning off that multi-frame generation has completely annihilated the frame rate. We've gone down from about 150 down to 44, 43, so it's about a third of the frame rate. Do you know, this is actually the only game I finished in 2024, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and I loved it. It's not perfect by any stretch, but this actually is the main reason I wanted to build a small form factor PC, because for me this is a living room game, and Mrs. Tech Chap loved watching me play it, and I didn't want to bring the whole tower PC into the living room next to the PS5, so this kind of living room gaming PC is for games like this for me. Everything's whacked up, as you'd expect, 4K, full RT, supreme quality settings, we've got balanced DLSS and frame generation enabled, and at least at this level here, we're getting just shy of 100 FPS of 90s. Not consistently breaking triple digits, which I maybe would have hoped for on a 5090. But right now, this isn't optimized for DLSS 4. So while it does have frame generation, it's the older variety where it's just giving you that one AI generated frame per actual rendered frame. So we're not getting that 4x boost. It's more like a 2x boost. So yeah, not quite triple digits in here, which I guess is a little bit disappointing. Oh, no, that's too close. All right, where does that leave us with the 5090 and my small build here? Well, I think the 5090 is obviously the most powerful gaming GPU you can buy, but as we all expected, most of that horsepower, most of that extra performance is down to DLSS 4, with A, the improved transformer model for DLSS, and mainly B, the new multi-frame generation up to 4x. Plus, of course, there's general architectural improvements which will improve performance and power efficiency, and new generation RT and tensor cores, all that good stuff under the hood, but DLSS 4 is the MVP here. Is it worth $2,000? Well, only you can answer that. I think it's exclusively for people playing at 4K with high frame rate. If you've got a 4K 144, or in my case, 4K 240 Hz monitor here, which are becoming more common, but by themselves will cost you upwards over £1,000. So once you put all this, system together, we're talking the best part of $5,000. I think it's going to be best to wait to see how the 5080, 70 Ti, and the 70 perform. We haven't got review benchmarks just yet. Definitely check out my buddy PC-centric Marcus. His videos are exceptional if you want to deep dive into sort of more benchmarky stuff. I think the 5070 Ti might be the sweet spot in terms of giving you that DLSS 4 and also enough VRAM for playing at 4K or Quad HD high frame rate, and without also costing an absolute fortune. So what do you think of this build? Would you have done anything differently, changed out any components? And also, if you had a 5090, what's the first game you would play on it? And if you fancied building one of these for yourself, I'll leave links to all the components in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, a cheeky like and subscribe would be fantastic, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.